Welcome back to the Freemouse MC YouTube channel, and I have now spent over a month with the Royal Enfield Bear 650, and my personal bike is the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. Two bikes that are very similar, and most likely a lot of people are stuck in between them and trying to decide, and some people that have the Interceptor and want a more scrambler experience most likely think, maybe I should have just gotten the Bear. And this video is to clear up all those questions and give a proper comparison between the two bikes. First of all, the price for the Royal Enfield Bear 650 is $7,640 to $7,890 here in my home country Germany, while this bike is $50 to $100 more expensive. It's a really close one, basically the same. Still the point goes to the Bear because it's slightly cheaper, and we have to be fair. So let's get to the point that you're all here for. How do these bikes ride? And for that, let's quickly get through the specs. Both bikes have the 648cc air and oil cooled engine producing 47 horsepower, and in the case of the Interceptor 52 Newton meters, and here 56 Newton meters. That's in real life applications not really noticeable, except that this bike has a bit more go above 100 kilometers an hour, which also could be due to the different gearing. When it comes to the suspension, this bike has 130 millimeters with an upside down suspension from Showa in the front, while here you have 110 millimeters in the rear. Here we have 115 and here 88. How much more off-road capable the Bear 650 as a result is, we will get to in a moment. However, when it comes to riding these two motorcycles, this is a much more refined, modern feel that feels like a proper modern naked bike most of the time. And also from its comfort level, it feels like a bike built today. Objectively, the Royal Enfield Bear 650 handles better. However, we're talking about retro bikes here, and the feel that a motorcycle gives you and how it is to ride, this one also handles really good. It's not comparable to an actual old motorcycle, but it gives you quite a lot of that while still keeping you safe with an anti-hopping clutch and like ABS and all the good stuff that you maybe don't actually want to risk on an authentically old motorcycle. And for that, it gives you all the nice feels without the drawbacks. So the subjective feel of how it feels to ride a motorcycle is really good here. Like when you lean over the bike, it feels like on rails. However, it still shakes a bit when you drive over a bump, and it doesn't handle it too well, but it feels really good for an old bike, especially also with all the contact points, with the handlebars here being really nice and thin like on an old bike, and the way that the levers feel, and it just fits with the design. It's all in one go, and it really authentically transports this old bike feel, even though that over a longer period can lead to some back pain. However, basically these two bikes give each other a draw there because they are good in their own ways. Here you sit a bit more in the bike instead of on top of the bike because the seat being a bit different, while here you sit more on the bike, which helps the old bike feel. However, the seat is just terribly uncomfortable. But yeah, that belongs to that experience, and I think they're different, good in their own ways, and I will be making this a draw with that. Talking about seat comfort, let's get to how it is to ride the bike in day-to-day life, because that's where you sit a lot on the motorbike, riding through the city, riding to work, riding home, and riding where I need to be. And I can already tell you that point goes to the Bear, because with the Bear, the seating comfort is better, and it's not just the seating comfort, also with the way that you grab the handlebars and how everything comes together, your lower back can handle this bike for longer. And there are more advantages in day-to-day life of the Bear 650. This bike comes with hazard lights, and basically in all cities around the world, it's the unspoken rule that if you go in between the cars, you put on your hazards. And yes, I think later versions of the Interceptor came with hazards, but the way that the bike is standing here right now, my Interceptor does not have hazards, and that can be a pain. And there are also other things, because of the different materials used here on the bike. You don't feel that bad if this bike stands outside, because with the chrome you really always need a garage. We will get to that point later. However, the bike, the Interceptor, has one draw if you watch this video years down the line, where it's better than the Bear. This bike comes with a center stand, and that it comes with a center stand is really helpful for regular maintenance and if you maintain your own motorcycle, because then putting it on this kind of lift and then maybe your driveway is not straight, and yeah, it's just a bit of a pain. So if these bikes get older and you need to do stuff more regularly, then this can have some advantages. But after all, the point still goes to the Bear. So the Bear is pulling ahead with already being 2 points in the front. Let's get to the point that makes the Bear special. How much off-road capable is the Royal Enfield Bear 650 compared to the Royal Enfield Interceptor? And first of all, I have to say, the frame that these two bikes are based on is an incredible base for a scrambler. If you look for a scrambler build, basically both of these bikes are pretty good choices. The way that they're standing here, both bikes are surprisingly off-road capable. This motorcycle managed the whole Trans-Europe trail through the Balkans. No worries whatsoever, and also was on the same trails as people with the Himalayan 450, as I actually ran into the motorcycle review test of 1000 PSTV while just being in the Balkans on the Trans-Europe trail with this bike, and it did it all fine. However, this bike managed parts of the Trans-Europe trail in Sweden and loads of other stuff in Sweden, and was also fine. So where does the improvement actually come in? Here you have a bit more suspension travel. However, it has to be said, both of these bikes are road bikes, and you can feel that. However, both of them manage the occasional off-road riding. However, it has to be said that the real off-road advantage of the Royal Enfield Bear 650 is not the increased suspension travel. However, that Royal Enfield redid how the part of the wiring harness in the back is made for the rear light and the blinkers. Because if you off-road this bike quite a bit, you're going to at some point rip the wiring harness because the wheel hits the rest of the bike and rips it apart because the cable is just underneath there. And then you need to solder it back together. This genuinely happened on this motorcycle. However, I have to say, it's quite hard to get that to happen. It took 25,000 kilometers until that was a problem. And when I talked to mechanics that work quite a lot on Royal Enfields, they said first time they heard of it. And I always rode this bike over whatever because it genuinely can do that. Both of these motorcycles are capable to go somewhere where you also would go with a Himalayan 450 if you just dare to do that. One thing I forgot to mention, the Royal Enfield Bear 650 comes with an off-switchable rear ABS. While on the Interceptor you have to deal with the ABS, or you really quickly pull out the fuse for the ABS. That takes less than a minute if you don't have any luggage on the bike, or you install an off-switchable ABS switch like on my bike that I can also use all the time and don't have to stop the bike to use it like on the Bear 650. So even though the Royal Enfield Bear 650 is a bit better equipped for off-road riding, the actual off-road riding capability of what you end up being able to do with the motorcycles is basically the same. You approach the same obstacles and you say stop at the same obstacles. With that, I would say off-road riding wise, that's a draw because the increased suspension travel is kind of balanced out by this bike having these handlebars, which are supposed to be raised. However, they kind of slope down, resulting in a more cafe racer-ish riding position, which is fun on road, however not that fun off-road. And for some reason, the Interceptor with its stock handlebars then handles actually a bit better from the way that you hold onto the handlebars off-road. So that's why it's a draw at the end. Let's get to the next point, the build quality. The build quality on these two motorcycles is really, really similar because they're very close to being the same bike, and in general, the build quality on the Royal Enfields is really nice. You look close at the bike and you're like, wow, the welding is really good. You're really impressed by it, and that's really genuine like that. I know a guy who's not a friend of Royal Enfields and he doesn't like them that much, and I rode to him with this bike and he looked at it and he was like, wow, I'm surprised by the build quality. He likes Suzuki Intruders and so on, and he was like, that's genuinely a competitive motorbike, and that can be said for both of these bikes. However, I would say that when it comes to the build quality and how it then actually feels to live with the bike, this bike is a bit better because the contact points feel better. Because the shift lever and also the way that the rear brake here is with the exhaust has this part that pushes out, resulting in you having crooked feet on the bike. That does not feel nice, especially because you really feel that because you always have your feet on the bike. And you feel it when you brake, you feel it when you shift. It's not that much of a big deal. You forget about it when you ride it. However, here with the foot pegs being far apart and you have the engine in between and you have this really thin handlebar that really fits the experience of this motorcycle, I have to say that point definitely goes to the Interceptor. Especially also the Interceptor is one full experience. This is a nice retro bike, and you are never reminded of that it's not actually an old motorcycle, except when you hear feel the anti-hopping clutch, but yeah, whatever, they cannot actually build an old bike. And that also is with the blinkers and everything. And it's so gorgeous. It's so gorgeous. And that's like not standard in the motorcycle industry. A lot of nice retro bikes don't come with this. And this is the full experience where nothing breaks your illusion. However, here, I don't mind the DFT dash that much because it actually comes with quite a lot of functions. That's cool, and yes, it breaks that illusion. However, the functions are nice. But however, here you have the blinkers, and I feel like the blinkers don't fit the rest of the design. Especially, you have a chromed handlebar, and you have a chromed rear light, and the chromed gas tank cap. And that's not a lot of chrome. However, it looks nicely, and it looks like nice chrome accents. And it could have, like, if they would have just taken these blinkers, like these blinkers, how they're on an Interceptor, and just put them on there, would have been fine. Like, and I don't exactly get why they now put these blinkers on there. So, maybe because they're integrated here into the part of the headlight, and the headlight is differently mounted there, so maybe that's why they went a different route here. Looking at them here now in detail. However, I think in that regard that the Interceptor does a better job, and with that, it's the first point for the Interceptor in this comparison, so we're now 2-1. Yeah, let's see how it continues. Let's get to the point of maintenance, and here the Bear really takes the lead, because with this bike having the blacked out engine and this exhaust with basically the like this nice colored, I don't know what that is, I think steel, it looks really nice. And at the same time, of course, this looks a bit nicer. However, this is really maintenance intense. When you ride this bike, like, you need to polish the chrome quite a lot. When you go on a long trip, it literally feels like walking into a liver hook while boxing. Like, you see the bike rust and you're like, oof, that's painful. That does not feel good. And you need to fight that rust. You need to maintain it for it to continue to look nice. And that's genuinely sometimes a pain. And here, this is not that much of a worry. Like, if the bike stands outside and it's just under the cover, you don't instantly think, oh fuck, I'm not doing the right thing, I should drive back to the garage. It's not right that the bike is standing under the cover in front of the apartment. Like, those thoughts are there with this bike. I'm genuinely going to give the Royal Enfield Bear 650 2 points for that, because really, if you watch this video, look into yourself, are you ready to do all this maintenance work? And not just like, oh yeah, I most likely get it done. No, you need to do that very regularly, otherwise your owning experience suffers. So I will give the Bear 2 points for that, putting the Bear into the lead with 4 points compared to 1 for the Interceptor. Let's get to the next point, looks and curb appeal. And first of all, both of these motorcycles are really beautiful, also in their own way with their very unique colorways. I really love the like 249 colorway here. It's one of my favorite colorways that I've seen on a motorcycle in the last few years. However, the Interceptor also comes with really nice colorways, and this is one of the higher spec colorways, and I really like that the Interceptor comes with a really beautiful orange colorway as a base color that no one has to be ashamed of buying. Like, that's really great that the base color already is like that beautiful. Then in the looks department, even though both of these bikes are gorgeous, I have to say the Interceptor definitely takes it, because yes, the upside down suspension does a nice job in riding. However, how does it look? Does it look fitting for a scrambler? Yes, you have the protectors of the forks that, like, rocks don't fly onto the exposed forks. However, here with like basically the fork being like an old school upside right way, and with these kind of protectors here, I don't know how they're called, it looks a lot more fitting to the bike's design, in my opinion. And also with the chrome, and just like I already earlier said, there's nothing breaking the illusion of a retro bike here. It just all looks really gorgeous. And like, yes, you get approached with this motorcycle. If you're standing somewhere, people come up to you and are like, oh yeah, this is a really cool bike. With this one, you kind of get introverted because people come too much to you, and you're just like, so many people say my bike is beautiful. I also really like the way that the headlight here is set up. This headlight is of course more practical for off-roading because it doesn't sag down. Here, if you off-road a bit, it will do that. And so I genuinely like the look of the Interceptor more. Also, the curb appeal is just bigger. People come up to you with this motorcycle, but people come up to you with this bike on a different level. Like, it sometimes gets uncomfortable because they're just like, wow, this is such a gorgeous bike. And I think definitely the Interceptor takes it here. So the Interceptor is catching up. We're looking now at 4-2, still with the Bear in the lead. However, we have more points to go, and that's customizability. Both of these bikes are really similar, and because the Royal Enfield Interceptor has a lot of customizability, this bike has too, because it's the same frame and you can do a lot. And this bike has been on the market quite a lot, and it's a great bike if you want to make something your own, and it's just amazing there. However, I have to say that goes to the Interceptor as well, because a lot of the parts, you can be 100% sure they fit on the Interceptor if they are said to fit on the Interceptor, and here you're just seeing what fits for the Interceptor and you're like, whoa, be fine. And then you find out, oh, the screw sizes are a bit different, gotta figure it out, go to the hardware store and get actually fitting screws. That's how I got the Hepco and Becker suitcase mounts on there, and then it doesn't really fit with the blinkers and so on. But this bike will also be a great option for a custom bike. Basically, those two bikes are both 10 out of 10 options for that. However, the Interceptor is a bit better there because it has been on the market so long, and there's such a big aftermarket for it that basically the Bear also benefits from. However, this is the bike that it's made for. Here, the front suspension looks different, so you're a bit at a disadvantage here. So a lot of parts that are for the front of the bike here will maybe not fit here, or you can definitely not be sure that they will fit. However, one thing that works for both of these bikes is you can put a surfboard mount on them, which is pretty cool. Sadly, the surfboard mount from Bach is not getting produced anymore. However, I'm starting to make my own surfboard mount. I'm making them by hand, and I'm making them together with my uncle, and I already got the first few orders from the Waves and Wheels Festival, so if you want one, definitely write me an email. So back, I just got interrupted by an older woman that really liked the Royal Enfields, and she wants to do her license, and she was like, oh yeah, I need to do my license right now, and I helped her to set her up for the license on her phone. So, speaking of that, let's talk about the long-term owning experience that these bikes most likely will give you. I now only had the Bear 650 for a month, but I had this bike for almost 2 years, 1.5. But I still think that we can say a lot about how these bikes will be 5, 10, 15 years down the line. And I think that the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650 really gets the point here, because it's better in the classic design part of things with the still analog gauges. Yes, the DFT has nice functions. However, what is the first thing that you see when something ages and that makes you kind of frown when you walk past a car or a motorbike? It's the digital dash, and that will look a lot better here. And also with the retro design being more faithful here, I think that will be better. And also with the bike having more the emotionally great riding experience, kind of similar to a Harley, where you feel every vibration and every thump of the engine. This is more that experience, and I think that builds a better connection with the bike, and over the long term you're going to be, I think, happier with this bike. Also with doing all the maintenance that you put into it, it builds a personal connection to some degree. So I think in the long run, the feeling of, yeah, that's my motorcycle and I really like my motorcycle, is going to be a lot stronger with the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. And also when a bunch of these bikes have been sold and the prices on the used market went down, and then maybe at some point they're going up again, I think that I don't know if they will sell as many Bears as they sold Interceptors. However, I think this is a bit more the more desirable bike than in the future. And so I think the long-term owning experience definitely goes to the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650. So after having talked through the different points of the Royal Enfield Bear and Interceptor 650, the Bear is at the front with 5 points and the Interceptor with 4, which means that technically from my video, the Bear 650 is the better bike. However, I would have to say that it really depends on who you are as a person, what you want out of a motorcycle, and also what is financially possible for you. I mean, the bike, this is technically 50 to $100 cheaper. However, this bike is a lot more present on the used market. The engines are reliable. There has to be no fear buying one of these with 30,000 kilometers on the clock for a bit cheaper if new is not for you. That is no problem. And I think if you already own the Interceptor and you now see, oh, the Royal Enfield Bear 650 is released and I would like to take my bike more off-road, and it's a bummer that I don't gotten this bike, it's not that much of a big deal. You're not missing out on that much that you don't already get with the Interceptor. You're perfectly fine. If you want to ride your bike off-road, just do it with this. I now took the bike quite fast off-road as well on my trip through Sweden, which was possible because of the a bit more suspension travel, going up to 70, 80. But that was because I was going with 2 friends and they were on off-road capable motorbikes and the testosterone was in the air. Otherwise, you're fine with this. If I would have been alone, I would have gone like 40, 60. So, and that bike can perfectly do that. So I don't think that if you already have the Interceptor that you need to necessarily upgrade if you really want a scrambler experience. However, I also think there's a quite big appeal to building your own scrambler. And I think for that, also the Interceptor is a great option. Yes, the frame is a bit more strengthened here, where basically the front of the bike then is attached. However, there's so many aftermarket parts, and the frame of this bike handled me just riding it off-road and riding it downstairs and so on for over 20,000 kilometers, so it's good. And I would love to give the bike, for example, an upswept exhaust. I'm looking at an upswept exhaust online so regularly, and I just want one, and it's $1,200, and I don't have that kind of money. And yeah, there's so many options to do. And also, like, with the suspension, you potentially could make a front end swap from this bike over to this bike and put the rear suspension over. And that was actually my original plan, to, after testing the bike, and if I like it, to be like, oh yes, I'm going to do that, and ask Royal Enfield if they give me the parts. However, I'm happy with the bike it is. And like I said, the bikes are really close at the end of the day, and I like my old school, like, kind of rough handling. And if I wanted to be more scrambler capable, I don't know if that's enough, because like I said, it's too close. So I think I would just get some actual, like, real off-road capable suspension. We will at some point see a Royal Enfield Himalayan 750. And I think that could also be really interesting, and that's also a bit most likely the reason why we got the Bear the way that it is. It's slightly a scrambler, similar to how the Continental is slightly a sports bike, which I also think is a bike you should try out if you're looking at these two, because the fun factor of the scrambler, like, everyone wants a scrambler right now, and yes, they're fun. However, off-road riding is really limited in many places in the world, and the Continental is a bit more sporty, and you get that fun factor on every road you ride, so definitely try that one out as well. Curious to try that, and then I will make a guide on, like, for who each of these bikes actually is. If you liked this video, definitely like and subscribe and comment, and see you guys in the next video.